In a world filled with conflict, in a universe comprised of differences, there's one thing that absolutely everything shares in common. We all exist. Including two guys named Jack and Michael, who like to chat about that very thing over a good cup of coffee. Let's pay them a visit, shall we?
Existence Brewing.
I think I will go for the kombucha again with pumpkin spice and gravy with turkey and cranberry sauce. Oh, I get mashed potatoes with that too? Wow.
Yeah, you want them on the top or the side?
Hey. Yeah, you got just here in time to see me drink my Thanksgiving meal in a glass.
It's funny. I always thought that was going to be the case with the, like Taco Bell was going to come out with it. Like the drinkable latte. Like you'd put sour cream and stuff on top of it, and there'd be, I don't know, some kind of thing. Meat, beef-flavored coffee, chicken-flavored coffee, and then you can put hot
like
sauce
a taco,
in it if you want,
and then you could
yeah, exactly like
put
that.
hot sauce in it. Yeah. No, that's a good idea. I think we just gave him an idea.
He froze on me.
You froze on me. I didn't freeze on you.
Oh, well, we both froze together then.
All right. Well, so here we are again, and I'm glad we got our seat. This seat always seems to be available, doesn't it?
Well, I've had it saved, and there's a way you can do that, without having to actually put like a sign on it or anything.
Oh, really? How do you do that?
Yeah. It's like a whole thing. You hire somebody to do it. It's like a seat saver. They have those. You seen those? Those guys, seat savers. Hire me, the seat saver.
Is that who that guy is? I thought he worked here.
No, he's Clement. Clement is my seat saver. He comes in and it's a little fairy dust, a little shake of this. It has something to do with pheromones or something. It makes the seat smell particularly unattractive to most people, so they move on.
What's the difference between something that smells good and something that stinks? Right?
A downy ball.
A downy ball, yeah. Because I like the smell. I like the smell of Tide Pods, but my wife refuses to use them in our laundry. And I don't want to do the laundry, so I'm just like, okay, whatever. I'll have unscented laundry. But she refuses to buy scents, and I don't like anything too flowery. I just like the smell of Tide.
Yeah, well, Roll Tide means something entirely different in the Southeast as it does up here, I suppose. And in Alabama exclusively, it means something completely different too. There was this ad. It's not Febreze, but it's I think it's Airwicks or something like that. It's a spray though. And I was just watching this the other day, or it was on. Let's put it that way. Do not watch commercials. They're just on. You ever notice that about a commercial? Like we don't really watch them. They just sort of happen.
Yeah.
They filter into our brains.
They're kind of like car crashes.
Yeah, exactly. Although they never disclosed the number of dead or anybody who actually was injured in the thing. That's all kept secret. But the guy was just spraying everything. And the whole notion of it to me was just like, this can't be good. Like, I don't know what they make this stuff out of. I'm sure it's non-toxic enough. Like, it isn't like going in and spraying Raid all over everything in your home. Everybody's going to get sick. But I don't think spraying this shit everywhere.
Yeah.
Is probably the best idea. And yet this ad, and it was a guy going like rampant with it. He was the one that was having the spree in the home. It wasn't the female, which you'd think would be the target audience. Who did they sell the Febreze and Airwick stick-up fresheners and all that stuff to? They sell it to the women because they're the ones that can't handle most of the unpleasant odors in life. Men are like, hey, get used to it. It's onions. It's raw sewage. I've been living here 17 years. It's like, God, it smells like raw sewage. It is raw sewage. I live right next door to the plant. It's good for you. It puts hair on your chest.
It's organic.
It's a whole Bulgarian macho thing, she'll have no hair today because of raw sewage next door.
Well,
but
it's kind of like the body spray.
It's a guy is spraying shit all over the house, and he won't leave anybody. He sprays everybody with it, the pets, the food, the corners of the, everything gets doused with this stuff. And I'm just thinking, this can't be good. I don't think this is right.
It's kind of like the Axe body spray or the body sprays that they have for women. I feel like if you stink that badly, maybe you should just take a shower instead of spraying this stuff on you to mask something that's just going to make you smell like Axe and whatever it is that's making you stink.
I think my first hesitation on Axe is the name of the product.
Oh, that's
Anything
true.
That's used to chop wood or crudely, behead a chicken or a sheep or something is probably not something I want to be putting all over my body. Just saying.
And what's the verb for that? You're going to axe yourself.
Paul Bunyan might have used Axe to smell good for Babe.
Well, there's an idea for a new scent for Axe, the Paul Bunyan. It smells like chainsaw grease and fresh pine.
Chainsaw lubricating oil. Although Bunyan didn't have a chainsaw to my knowledge. That's pretty advanced.
That's right.
He's an old-fashioned guy. And he must have masturbated like constantly too, because he didn't have a wife. There were no other giants apparently in the lore of Paul Bunyan. It was just Paul and Babe. It's like, well, you got, it's like, hey, Paul, here's your choices. Bestiality with this ox unless you die. Good luck with that. Or you can go find a giant wife somewhere. There are no giant wives.
Gosh, that's so true. I never thought about that. It would be something manly. It would be grease of some sort. Maybe it was oxen grease.
Don't you love how our ancestors, I don't know where that myth came from, but it's got to be North American enough that Paul Bunyan becomes the reason why the United States, as it became, North America, was pretty much, 80% deforested within the first 100 years that white settlers were here. It's Paul Bunyan and his big, and what's with the ox? It's
where did all the
board in that?
It
was almost like Bunyan was flying solo for the first 40 years of that myth, and then somebody said, he should have an ox and it should be blue. It's good idea. So we'll throw that in. He needs a farm animal.
Leave it to the industrialists to come up with a folklore character to justify why all of the forests were cut down.
He needs a domestic animal that's either in constant frostbite or necrosis. So we're just going to give him this blue ox named Babe. Of course, too. That's the other, and then hence the wife thing.
And so then Babe probably ate all the buffalo too, right?
Oh, sure. Yep. Babe gobbled up those, and exactly. So, see, isn't it weird how, don't you love that? It's just like, well, we've truly fucked up here, guys. We've taken away all the trees and all the buffalo, so we got to invent a reason why. Oh, Paul Bunyan and Babe. That's it. So there you go. Exactly. Now you're on it.
So speaking
it's
of
like Nixon in the 70s, we have to invent a reason why all this Vietnam didn't work out. Let's make Nixon. Let's just
blame it on
I don't think Nixon he was even real. So.
Right. Well, I told you that I'm taking the kids camping this weekend, and
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I've been using kind of that I use YouTube a lot. Anymore, I don't read books. I just, if I'm thinking of going into a new hobby or I need information about something, I just go to YouTube anymore. I'll just flat out say and admit to it. I don't read anything else.
The writers out there very happy.
I go to YouTube and I watch Lenny in Ohio tell me the ins and outs about a tent and why I should buy this tent. And I was surprised on how well AI and the YouTube algorithms do in just finding videos or content that based on the other content that you viewed, and they know how long you've viewed it, that you would probably like than this. And then they just keep kind of suggesting things. Well, in our previous episode, I was talking about Sasquatch calls. And of course, we
finished with the Sasquatch call.
Yeah, I did a little teaser at the end of the last episode. And don't worry, if you didn't catch the last episode, you didn't miss much.
Self-deprecating podcast hoster here.
But yeah, you can go and check this out. I mean, obviously, is it cryptids? Is that the the correct terminology? Yes. Cryptids.
Well, now but you got to remember, it depends on what your theory about the origins and like existence of Bigfoot are. I guess there could be some that are cryptids, but it's also he, and yes, I'm sorry, ladies of the audience, we are using he, capital H, to just generally apply to Sasquatch across the board, much like we would God in the old days. Because Sasquatch, let's face it, I'm sure there are lady Sasquatch, but
there would have to be.
They look like he. So, but yes, so Sasquatch as a proper capital noun, he is often associated with UFO activity too. There's plenty of people that have claimed to have seen strange lights in the sky or flat out seen UAPs, as they're called. I still can't get used to UAP, but I'm trying.
Yeah, me neither.
It takes me a long time to get on the new track. I like UFO. I don't think unidentified flying object, unidentified aerial phenomenon. Unidentified aerial phenomenon. It sounds a little military for I mean, I like the big words, but to me, the UAP is a little different. Anyway, that activity, experiencers have also said, yeah, there were Sasquatch involved. And typically the Sasquatch steals the show. It's like, yeah, I saw a fucking Sasquatch, and it was this big, and it was hairy all over, and it was taking a dump in the woods, and it was eating Jack Link's beef jerky and was looking right at me, and it wondered why I was not going to Sunday school anymore. And there happened to be these lights in the sky. But sometimes it's been the reverse.
It all comes back to the UAPs, doesn't it?
Yeah, so anyway, cryptid would imply, cryptid basically means a species of animal or a species, some kind of creature that lives on the planet, either aquatically or terrestrially, that we have yet to classify. We haven't run it down yet. Sasquatch is kind of like the father of all modern cryptids because that's the legend that goes back to far enough. But there's a ton of them. In fact, I'm sitting next to my cryptid tarot deck that was given to me by my girlfriend for my birthday a couple of years ago, and that's got like all the cryptids in it, like tons of them. So they don't list them on these, but there's pictures of them on the cards and stuff.
Oh, okay. So is that for doing readings?
I brought those with me today. Yeah, it's for doing tarot readings, but and oh look, Knight of Cups, how nice. But there's lots of them. But categorically, a cryptid is an animal. It's a life form that zoologists have not properly identified yet. It could be out there. There's evidence of it. People have say they've seen something like this. Maybe there's a hair or something that they haven't been able to pick up with science or whatever, but it's a cryptid. Mm-hmm. Some people rope aliens, some people rope extraterrestrials in with cryptids, some people separate the two. And so cryptids would be a term that's kind of loosely used for describing all of those phenomenon, but it's generally that's what it's supposed to mean. And I would categorically say that, cryptids are probably earthbound things, whereas ETs are off-world intelligences. They come from somewhere else, so maybe they're their own kind of cryptid. But anyway, so cryptid would be the term, but that's just to clarify.
So then I was on YouTube, and there's this new feature that we've discussed privately about shorts and how those shorts, they really kind of bring you in. Like it's a really good way for YouTube to inject content, but not really make it a full-length video. It's like 60 seconds of a short. So it's just a clip, and then probably based on whether or not you watch the short, then they will recommend further content that is related to the short or whatever. So I ran across this short, and it was in regards to this thing that I really didn't know anything about, which was Bigfoot calling. And so I want to play this for you because I thought that it was a little interesting.
Jim Hammer posted the following video to his Facebook profile, hoping that some of his friends would be able to help him explain what exactly it was he heard one day while out in the forest. The noises seem to occur every few seconds but can be heard remarkably loud. A lot of commenters don't seem too convinced that this was some sort of strange animal, but rather Bigfoot. Of course, it's impossible to know if it's Bigfoot for sure because we don't ever see anything in the video, we only hear things. But it's definitely a creepy thought that shouldn't be ruled out.
And I like how the author of this short kind of tees it up for us. Billy was out cutting wood one day and just happened to be cleaning his telescope when he zoomed in on a naked woman who just happened to live down the block from him, and his telescope just happened to be pointing in the woman's direction, which led to
stuff. I liked the whole part about how they were only seconds apart, but they were loud. I was like, okay, we heard that, but it sounds like a howler monkey to me. I mean, it sounds a lot like primates that they have recorded in the jungles of the world, South America, Africa. But I'm not an expert in what those animals sound like, so I guess this would add to the cryptid mystery then, if this were verifiable by some zoologist or some anthropologist, probably, because we're looking at the study of primates, then he might be able to come along, he or she, and say, I don't know what that is. It's an unidentified species, audibly anyway.
Well, the author does not go any further to try and disprove or prove what the sound is. Here, let's listen to it again. It definitely has a Harry and the Hendersons vibe to it, doesn't it?
It could be John Lithgow. He lives in Whitefish, Montana, was just there not that long ago. And there was a woman in the grocery store who was all about it. She was like, oh, we used to see him in the store all the time, but we don't anymore because he's fallen ill and he's a shut-in. And it was interesting. John Lithgow was in that movie, by the way, so that's why I say that. I don't know. It sounds kind of like a mixed bag to me. That first noise that comes over, that would make the hair on the back of my neck stand up.
Totally.
And then the next couple kind of sounds like, I don't know. They don't sound as menacing as much from there. They sound almost like celebratory in some strange way. But there's been not lots of, but there have been other cases of reported Sasquatch sounds in the forest, or things that are unidentifiable. Coyotes can make some damn weird noises, I will tell you that. Mm-hmm. I know my best friend from high school, he went to school here in the state and to be a school teacher, and then the first job that he got offered was in the deserts of Southern California, California City, California, not too far away from Lancaster, Barstow, that area. And so he took a job down there, and then he eventually moved back home. We took like every young 20s, used to be a rite of passage. You take your cross-country trip or your trip. So we took this trip down to California and checked out New Mexico and Arizona and Denver and those places. But when we were out, he wanted to go, as he said, back home where he lived there. And he had a friend who we stayed with out there. Must have gotten there at like 3 a.m, and we just walked into the guy's house and dropped our sleeping bags on the floor. And he just said, oh yeah, I just dropped the bags on the floor and I was a smoker at the time, way back then. And I went out to have a pre-bed cigarette because, of course, you can't go to bed without your nicotine rush, right?
Of course.
Nothing helps a young boy sleep like nicotine. And where this guy lived, it was this suburban neighborhood because this California City was burgeoning at the time. The deserts of California, a couple of different places out there, were supposed to be just boom towns in the 90s, and they just dropped off the face of the earth. And that's exactly what this subdivision did. It literally, like, the street ended, and he lived at the end of this street, and it went off into the wilds of the desert for as far as the eye could see. And I couldn't see that in the dark until the morning time when I got up, because at night it kind of just looked like it was a lot of houses and things. But I remember going out there to smoke that cigarette, and there was a coyote couldn't have been any more than, I want to say 20 feet away to make a noise that loud. And it was a noise from the other side. It came from the ether. It was screaming out. And I had never heard anything like that before. So that was that coyote, let's put it this way, that coyote just added a good 4 minutes to my life, because I put that cigarette out and came back in and went to sleep. I didn't want anything to do with whatever was out there. And the homeowner, the guy the next day that we were staying with, said, oh, yeah, it was a coyote. We have them all the time, and they do make the damnedest noises. And that kind of reminded me of the clip, a little bit, like a noise a coyote could make. But then again, I'm not also a coyote noise expert either, so I don't know. What do you think it was?
Well, I don't know. And the thing that this is relatively new to me, the Sasquatch, in terms of actually watching YouTube videos on it. And I've obviously seen documentaries and, the Patterson-Gilman film and all of those things. But, this calling there's a whole new following for this idea that you can go into the woods and communicate with these things. And people claim that they have been able to have calls come back to them from something, and they never are able to prove or disprove what it is that's calling back to them.
It would be in Sasquatch's best interest not to respond, because the first thing that will happen if there's a valid response is that marketers will put together something to advertise to them. That'll be the very first thing, is those calls will be about flaming hot Cheetos made just for Sasquatch.
It'll be Jack Links. Jack Links.
Yeah, exactly. The Sasquatch thing is interesting because it also brings up the question. There was a couple real good ones on Art Bell's old Coast to Coast program, kind of back, no offense to George Noory, but back when it was fun. Now it's a little off the wall. He never preferred George Noory too much, and nor do I, because Art was just a great storyteller. And for as involved as he was in the subject matter that he presented each night, and for as much of a believer as he was in a lot of it, he wasn't as entangled in it, I think, as perhaps Nori and some of his cohorts are. It's kind of trailed off into different territory. It used to be fun. There was mystery there. Again, Art was kind of an old time radio guy though, so he understood that about the medium. And I think that's been lost a little bit. Anyway, that aside, he had some good Sasquatch tales. And the one that I always recall centered around the guilt that this one man felt, because he said that he had shot one of these creatures in the woods years ago, and that there was a burial location that he and only he knew about, and that it was impossible for whatever reason, of course, for it to be found by animals, and nobody else would know that it was there. And it was all the mystery thing. Whether it was BS or not, who knows? It was just, again, great radio. But the guy did break down during the course of the interview, because he had said over the years that he'd always felt like there was a guilt in his mind for shooting these things between the eyes, like he said, because that it wasn't what we would consider to be an animal, that it was really more like a person, that he'd killed something that had a sentient nature. And there was a difference, because he'd been a hunter his whole life, and there was a difference in his mind between, unlike the Buddhist mentality that I possess, there's a difference between killing a bear or a moose or shooting something else that doesn't know any better. He said that shooting this thing made him feel like he was a murderer, and he was concerned that if they found it, they were going to bring him up on charges, because he didn't know what it was really. He said, what we think of as Sasquatch, what does that mean? So is it just a missing link? Is it a primate that we don't know about that's rather large? Is it kind of our ancestors or an offshoot of Homo sapiens? He said he got the impression that it may have, in fact, been a man, but some kind of man gone wrong or gone different, I guess, like someone who was not, someone who was developmentally disabled. Let's put it that way in PC terms. That's not the language he used back then. He used a different word, but it's not a word that offends me, but without using that word, he was basically saying, I almost got the impression that this was like a human that was like an X-Men kind of thing. Like, it's definitely a person, but there was a whole lot of stuff going on with it that isn't going on with 99.999% of the rest of us. And I shot it out of prejudice because I was afraid. I was fearing. So it brought up a really interesting, side channel. It brought up a really interesting discussion within the Sasquatch talk, the whole Sasquatch, thing, as it is. I can't think of the right word, but the whole Sasquatch, I guess, mythology is brought to a new level by that discussion. I'll always remember that, because we don't really often stop to think about what this is. First, it was just supposed to be like a missing link.
Yeah.
And now it seems to have evolved. Like I said, there's thoughts that this thing is, these things are associated with UFOs, and there's the story of the Enkidu. I don't know if you know the story of the Enkidu or not.
What's that?
The Enkidu goes back to the Mesopotamian myths. They're not myths, they're creation stories, actually. And Enkidu was supposed to have been one of the first things that was created, and it was very Sasquatch-like in its descriptions. I don't remember all of the lore surrounding the Enkidu, but the Sasquatch researchers who go that far back and want to try to find links to this creature often point to the Enkidu as being this critter that was described 15,000 years ago, that was essentially created by the Sumerian gods, by the people that were created by the Sumerian gods even. So there's all kinds of theories surrounding this. For as much as I love to believe in those kinds of things, and again, what does that even mean anymore? I'm not so sure about most cryptids, because there's so many fucking people anymore. And it just seems to me like if Sasquatch were real, something pretty concrete would have surfaced by now. Yeah. Because people are everywhere.
Satellite images or something.
Yeah, they're just everywhere. And I would think that there would be some kind of... But proof, what is that, too? Because It used to be... Like the Patterson footage, I've always loved the Patterson footage, because it looks like the same gait my mother had when she'd go to the grocery store on Saturday morning. Like I saw that with her packing a 20-pound turkey many times out of the store. It's like a guy going into bowling league. He looks back at the camera like, "Hey, how you doing?" So I've seen better videos. I know that. There's one that was taken up by not too far away from where we live, maybe a few counties over in the northeastern part of our state, of one that was supposed to have been running, just booking at full speed across this open meadow. And the scientific thing about that, because you look at it and go, well, it's a guy in a monkey suit who's just running. He did track in high school, and you don't even have to really be fast to pull on camera. It could look. But then the scientists got involved and said, no, based on how far away this was, using objects that are in the fore and background, you can tell that this thing, whatever it is about 9 to 10 feet tall, and the speed is faster than a cheetah because the stride is so long. It's so tremendous. So the speed was like almost 90 miles an hour or something this thing's booking along at. And you go, whoa. Now, where'd they find that expert? Who knows? So I haven't heard much about that story since, but there's some good ones out there. I think they are, if Sasquatch is a real phenomenon, I think they are associated with what we would call UFO activity. They're associated with interdimensional beings, and they somehow have a tie to them. I don't know if they're some kind of scout or some kind of a creation that they are tinkering with, just like humans. Maybe they're getting prepared for the big takeover when we get our next great flood or whatever it is, and they're the next to come down. We get Planet Chewbacca for a while. I really don't know, but it's another fascinating thing to think about.
It is, and believe it or not, don't believe it, whatever you do in terms of, or wherever you fall on the spectrum of Sasquatch or cryptids for that matter, it is interesting that some of these lore have hung around for as long as they have. It says here that David Thompson, a British explorer in 1811, is credited with the first discovery of what was a Sasquatch, or believed to be a Sasquatch footprint. And somewhere in Washington State, Mount St. Helens, in 1924, there was a group of prospectors that had an encounter with one that was rather violent. And later on, a group of them, from what they thought, returned to where they were staying overnight and started pelting the cabin with boulders. It seems like that is a reoccurring theme, though, in a lot of these experiences that you hear, is that there's, if it's not, trees being knocked, tree knocking, as they say, or there's usually some form of boulder being thrown in the air. One guy, according to this 911 call, swears that there was a Bigfoot that picked up his dog and threw it like 50 feet into the air, and the dog died because of it. It is interesting that they've survived for this long in terms of the lore, without any kind of credible physical proof besides the footprints that these things exist.
That's what leads me to believe that if, in fact, and there's been enough reports now that are credible over the years of, modern people. And of course, these reports are not just from here. They also exist all over the world in different forms. They have the Yeti in Asia, the Asiatic regions, and in Eastern Europe. They have their own versions of that. There's a really brutal story about, it's supposed to be a Yeti or something like that killed a bunch of, I think it was the Caucasus Mountains, if I'm getting my geography right here. It might have been the Ural Mountains, actually, somewhere in the regions of Kazakhstan or something like that. And the expedition party was pretty big. It was actually, as I want to say, 6, 7, 8 people, and they all were torn to shreds by something way, way up, like where there wouldn't really be, there's no polar bears there, and there's really nothing else going around. But the Russian government supposedly put a lid on it, and not a lot of information got out. And some people say it was a killer who'd been stalking them, and other people, of course, say no, that anybody who knows about the case, everything was consistent with being mauled by something that was very large and very angry. Or just very hungry. But they were mauled. They was like they weren't scavenged for meat. It wasn't a predation. It was. So there's a lot of these things around the world. But I would think, okay, if we're going to say that enough of these are actual sightings, this creature is real. What is it? Let's move to the next step. We've got the validation that this thing is, in whatever way, is real, or these creatures are real. Well, like I said, I think we'd have found a den, or I think we'd have found something. People are everywhere, and I'm sure somebody somewhere would have found something that would have satisfied the next stage of our curiosity. So I think it's associated with UFO activity because it's the same. It seems to be the same evidence that's left behind in the same manner as like a landing site. People, the farmer will go out in the field, or the person would say, yeah, it landed right over there. And they'll go out and there'll be a circular impression in the soil or in the field, and they'll do testing and they'll say, yes, and it was exposed to extreme heat and or radiation, and with crop circles, which is a whole different thing. But, of course, the way that the things are laid down are completely different. It's not consistent with crushing or with spindling or anything like that. And so the same thing, we have the sighting of the creature, we have the associated, footprint evidence. It's like, here's where it walked, but We've only got a few of them, or we only have one of them. And for whatever reason, there's no tracks. There's maybe a footprint or two, as if it's standing still and makes the impression of it. It's designed to leave only like just a trace of its remnants in the area, to be an enigmatic shadow on the wall, and before it just goes back to wherever it comes from. So
Right.
I'm convinced that it's some kind of otherworldly activity if it is a real phenomenon. And it could be the case with most cryptids.
And it's interesting that you bring up crop circles, because I think that that's a really good example of something that we don't know what causes them, but they are there, and there's a trace of it, but it doesn't go any further than that, right? You never see whatever is leaving these marks, whether it be Bigfoot or a crop circle, in the act of doing it. It's always just after the fact. So the only thing we really have from Sasquatch are these calls, let's say now, and the footprints that, in fact, my daughter's third grade teacher actually brought some Sasquatch footprints to class one day.
Oh, really? Where'd she get those?
Well, he's a Bigfooter. He's a believer, and so he's gathered them, I guess, in the woods somewhere.
Wow.
But it is interesting, isn't it? I mean, you never see anything landing in a crop to justify what is doing the crop circles. They're just there.
Well, that's actually not entirely true, because eventually there was supposed to be, and you can find it online, evidence that, because there was always balls of light, small balls of light that were wrapped up with the crop circle phenomenon. And eventually some of these balls of light were purportedly captured on video, and they were in the process of making a crop circle, as it's called. But of course, as we know, the demonstrations are incredibly elaborate. And I can tell you this much about crop circles. It's not two fucking guys who are running around all over the world with nothing better to do than eat white bread and crush crop circles and make them for. There were too many in too many locations. These two were idiots to begin with. And that whole business of making designs in a field, if you've ever seen a real crop circle vis-a-vis one that's man-made, that's just used by crushing the stems of the stalks of the wheat or the corn or whatever, you can see, look, it's a completely different deal. So that was basically done to just hush up the whole phenomenon. And so that's the problem with the crop circle phenomenon in general, is that once again, the government is not interested in furthering what this is, because they probably have a good idea of what it is already, and they don't like whatever it is. And so they don't want to promulgate whatever that is to the general population. So now, from what I understand, and it makes sense, farmers who find crop circles, people who discover crop circles on their property, are supposed to immediately cover them up. They're not supposed to invite people into them. They're not supposed to invite researchers out there. They're supposed to mow them over as fast as they can so that there's no visual evidence that gets out. And what crop circles were, when we were getting to the end of the mystery from the people that were researching them, if you were to believe them, and see, that's the problem with the fact that we don't have any credible governments going after things like this to really put their stamp behind it, then we can say, well, why would they lie to us? Well, they lie all the time, and so why would they cover things up? It's what they do. So it always lends, the problem is that whoever's researching it, no matter how credible they are, no matter how amazing whatever they're coming up with is, the issue becomes credibility. The issue becomes, well, this whole thing could have been a hoax or a larf, or they're just crazy, or because anymore, just to make things up, you don't have to do it just to be famous. You can do it just because you're a nut job.
Yeah.
And yet the evidence, because crop circles were very prolific in the 1990s, and it's one of the most fascinating phenomena that has a legitimate scientific backing that there is. I encourage you to seek that out. It sounds like you haven't watched a lot on that. It's one of the few phenomena that we've chased in the last 100 years, let's say, where we have a lot of very credible evidence to say that something extraordinary is happening, and we're doing it with just scientific evidence that is the remnants. It's the, not the remnants necessarily, but it is the effect, that the impact that whatever this is that's making the circles is having on the crops themselves. Because, as I said, the stems of the wheat or the corn or whatever it is, the barley, the rye, the oats, is not being just crushed. It's not being bent in some crude fashion. the actual structuring of the stem is being changed. There's blowouts in the stems that have to do with immense heat, actually. And you don't see that with crop circles that are man-made. You couldn't, because there's not really a technology that would do that just to make a formation.
Mm-hmm.
But the fascinating thing is what was at the end of this rainbow, because for the longest time, of course, when the crop circle phenomenon is circulating, it's aliens, it's extraterrestrials, they're making these, they're trying to send messages. What was finally discovered, and really what a lot of crop circle, I guess, people, for lack of it, people that researched them, people that followed the phenomenon have arrived at, and they've arrived at it with a pretty conclusive yes, is this was the Earth sending us a message, that this is Gaia, because those lights are coming from the internal workings of the planet. Those lights are literally coming out of, like, the swamp gas thing with good old
right.
With good old what's his name during Operation Blue Book, with Project Blue Book, Hynek,
that was the most ridiculous
these things.
The most ridiculous explanation for what people were seeing.
Yeah, and the person who it was used to relate the sighting to was incredibly offended by it, as well as they should have been. But in this case, we literally have, it's not swamp gas, but it is a terrestrial phenomenon. It's arriving from the internal workings of the Earth. These balls of light, if you watch the videos, and there are videos, plural, not just one, can be seen emanating from inside the Earth and then sweeping across the landscape and making these
etchings.
Incredibly elaborate, these elaborate etchings in the crops. They're emblazoned very quickly, they're made very quickly, and then the lights return from whence they came. They go back into the Earth. And so the researchers all became enlightened to the fact that it appears that this is a message. These are messages from the Earth itself. Mm-hmm. That because the Earth does not have a physical voice like we do to communicate in any language, English, Spanish, whatever, this is the only way it knows to try to get in touch with its current inhabitants to say, I'm in distress, you're in trouble, we're in trouble, you need to change. And because that's what all or most of these symbols were related to. A lot of them were very mandala-ish, They had ancient meanings that were assigned by people that had lived perhaps in the Vedic terms, 30,000 years ago or more even. And that isn't talked about anymore, because you'll notice the crop circle phenomenon, they just decided to drop a really bad bomb on it. Which was, we got to make this go away, because we can't have this out there. That's not good for business. And it's not. Let's face it. That's not good for the way things are. That's not good for the people who run the planet, the way the planet's currently operating, which in social terms, or in terms of how we live, I guess, is just this economic thing, this money and all this power and the leveraging of everything that's on the planet as a commodity, and the trading of it for money and power and wealth and all these things. So anyway, the two guys flying around the world, making these all over the place theory. Wow. It was almost like that's the best. Who signed off on that in the meeting?
Yeah.
Because that's pretty lame. But the crop circle thing, I followed that for a long time, because it's a very credible phenomenon. Not to take anything away from the Sasquatch sightings or anything that has to do with the UFO phenomenon, because there's a lot of very fascinating and credible sightings there. But the crop circle, this is elaborate evidence of something that isn't possible to make in human terms. It is, but it would be highly visible. I suppose you could go out and actually change, in some ways, I don't want to say the genetic makeup, but I'm not remembering. The stems were literally blown out, like they were hollowed out by the heat that was used to create these artistic impressions in the fields. And scientists who are just doing science things basically look at these and say, this isn't possible unless you apply extreme heat to the crop, so that the stems can literally be hollowed out. They can be blown out by this incredible heat.
And that's what causes them to lay down then.
So if you were using a technology like that, say a ray gun or
whatever,
something that was applying that heat, that would be highly visible to anybody. There'd be people trespass for, hey, get the hell out of my corn or my rye, because
right.
What are you doing?
Well, and they're
just showing up.
It doesn't seem
for
to.
A while, in the 90s, for a while, you'd wake up in the morning and there were a dozen new ones. I mean, they were prolific in the 90s. And then the phenomenon slowly started to drift out of the mainstream's interest, and they dropped this bomb on it that it was Lenny and Squiggy out just making these things at all hours of the night with their crude crushing devices, and the world was supposed to buy that and go to bed and say, forget it. Stop thinking about that's it. That's the danger. Stop thinking about it. Stop wondering what it is. Go back to the NFL, watch your football, worry about what Taylor Swift's, who she's dating now,
of course,
or whatever the flavor of the fucking week was at the time. Go back to, taking and swallowing what we give you and not what we don't want you to. So that's why it's swept under.
Eat more corn.
Is because.
Yeah, no, yeah. And it is interesting. The designs are very elaborate, and they're very symmetrical, almost to a point where
the precision is
incredible. Precision, yeah, and that's what makes me so fascinated with these cryptids, and now even just like this kind of crop circle tangent that we just got on, because it is something that is causing this to happen. We don't have any evidence on what it is. People want to debunk it immediately, which I always think is fascinating, how people want to debunk something but they don't have an answer for it. Right? So
I wonder who that could be.
Well, and I just think it's interesting that somebody would say, well, these are fake. Well, how do you know they're fake? Well, we just know they're fake. Well, how do you know? And so then you come up with some theory of swamp gas, which is just crazy. And some of these are very impressive. Now, the only thing that I am very skeptical about with crop circles, if it was the Earth that was trying to get a message to us, or, whatever this phenomenon might be, I find it interesting that it only stays in one field and that you don't see it transfer from the side of a field across the interstate into another field. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't cross lines. It's almost like whatever has placed this symbol or this design thought about it in very symmetrical, perfect proportions. And I don't know that nature would necessarily care, or that somebody who doesn't have a human mind would really care about that. It would cut across hundreds of miles and you could see it from a distance, but it wouldn't have any bounds, is what I'm saying.
I'll bet if you looked hard enough, you could find one that crossed a human boundary like you're talking about, because there were a lot of them, again, especially in the 1990s. But what you're saying also lends itself to what kind of an intelligence are we dealing with? I mean, even though we're living on the backside of the Earth, that's a hard thing to picture. I guess it's a hard, empathetic disposition to get into, but try to imagine yourself being a relatively, it's a small planet by and large, but, try imagine being the Earth, for whatever that's worth. And then knowing that what's going on with the inhabitants on the surface of you is out of balance. And you need to try to send a message to let them know that what's happening isn't necessarily in their best interest. It would be in some ways tantamount to your body sending you a message that, hey, when you got this flea powder on me, or when you put this borate on me, or when you got this Agent Orange on me today, when you were at work fiddling around with those old canisters that they marked, toxic, and you got it on my skin, I'm producing a response. I'm sending you pock marks. I'm sending you a rash. And is the rash then supposed to be in some fashion where it's relative to being interpreted by you in a way, say, well, there's a few bumps, but if it were a rash, it would spread up here, it would spread there. You're kind of saying the same thing, and it doesn't really hold a lot of water. Your body is a living organism, and you've irritated it with something, and its job is to let you know when you've done that by something, either by accident or by design. It's letting you know, hey, you fucked me up, and I'm letting you know because I'm giving you a reaction physically. And so very much the same, I think Gaia is doing her best to produce, perhaps in this case, a very lovely and intricate and precise rash, if you will. I hate to take away the artsy part of it because, the shapes are extraordinary, but it's kind of the same response, wouldn't you say? She's saying, well, I know that I'm dealing with creatures that are sentient and they do have some degree of intelligence, although look
they're
what they're
visual
doing. And
learners.
So there's a lack of understanding about the balance that's required to make sure that I'm okay and they're okay, and we're losing touch with each other, and I need to send them a sign, and so I'm going to do this. And then, so I think in the afterthought to come along and say, well, I don't understand why it doesn't cross a major interstate or why they're not bigger, or I think that's splitting a lot of additional hairs in the crop. I think that's splitting a lot of additional stems in the field. I think you just have to take the phenomenon for what it is. And again, the great thing about the crop circle, mystery, it's not really a mystery, I don't think, as much as it is just, it's not even a cover up, but the reason that we were given, is ludicrous. I mean, anybody that knows, casual observers might have bought the story that Starsky and Hutch got out of their Gran Torino at 3 a.m. on 7 different continents, 7 days a week, and made these formations with their little, boards that they fashioned out back, when they were visiting the General Lee.
Well, yeah, if so, I mean, they're beautiful. So
anybody that knows anything about the phenomenon knows that doesn't hold water at all. That's the most ludicrous notion that you could imagine. So the bomb that's dropped to get this to go away in this case is ridiculous, unlike some of the other bombs that have been dropped, which are fairly ludicrous, but not quite as bad as this. But to me, the questions still on the front and back side have to be the same. This is quite amazing. Why is any government of the world not taking a greater interest in this and studying it in the open in front of reporters from every newspaper and television station in the country, or the world for that matter? So it's vetted completely in the open and sharing this. That lends itself to, we already know what this is. And then on the backside, we want to make it go away. Why?
Right.
Because it seems that anything that might be in our best interest needs to go away quickly. And I'm not saying that there are things perhaps that we should be shielded or protected from en masse, but I'm not sure why we'd need to be shielded from something like this.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's anything sinister that's going on with it other than just a beautiful design, right? So the other thing that I also wonder too is that if, these things were manufactured by man, and it's hard to tell by some of these images anymore what's a real picture and what's been generated by AI or Photoshop, it's hard to tell, right? Yeah. So I think that then kind of takes away some credibility to the phenomenon as well, because if somebody uses it for an artistic, here's a picture of a Buddha, or, here's a picture of a skull that's right in the middle of this field surrounded by a bunch of designs. So, I mean, to me, I immediately go, okay, that was drawn up by somebody. But, if this is something that is man-made, recreate it. Show us how it's done, right?
Well,
if a government, if a government knows that this is being doctored up, or they have a suspicion that it's being doctored up, show us how you're going to do something like this and not get caught.
Well, it may just go to ignorance, too. It's possible that it's just sort of scoffed at, I guess, by the powers that be. But I have never understood. The first question I would ask is, okay, these elaborate and incredibly precise designs begin showing up of unknown origin in fields all across the world. They're not just here. It's a worldly phenomenon. It's a global phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
Why were we not all over this from the word go?
Right.
It seems to me like it seems to me like if we had been living in different times, even, people would have been all about this. There would have been a full-scale investigation launched, and we perhaps would have listened, I guess, is my point. But now it's just so, the effort, sadly, by Gaia is just so futile to put out a response. Some of us are interested. Some of us are fascinated with it.
Yeah.
But the problem is that the way information is exchanged in our world, it's still being done, even though the internet's a big thing and there's a lot of influencers out there. Well, who influences the influencers? Like you and I have oft wondered, why is it that a podcast about football or the latest Taylor Swift goings on or whatever it might be that's already in the popular eye or is kind of a branch of whatever's being pushed by the major media, why is it a podcast can launch and within a month they have 1 million followers and we can launch a podcast and have few to that number after several months? And it's not a conspiracy.
Feel like there's some censoring.
But it's, I think that, you have to remember who controls the beast, and the modality of all of this communication is, let's face it, it's filtered. It's looked at, it's vetted by machines, I'm sure, initially, every day. Millions and millions and millions and millions of pieces of information, people putting out videos, clips.
Well, and don't even get me started on YouTube's copyright filter. I think that is the most ridiculous thing ever. Because as two people who have worked in broadcasting before, we both know that none of the radio stations that we have ever worked at and have used content in their broadcasts, whether it be bumper music for a sporting event or whether it be whatever it is, it always is information that you're putting on the internet that supposedly has some copyright infringement claim to it. And I think it's an easy way for them to say, okay, yeah, get the content out of there. Well, why did you delete the content? Sure. Well, because it violated a copyright. Well, what copyright was that? Yeah, I mean, it's a way to censor is what it is.
Yeah, I'm not huge into conspiracy theories. I certainly, am encircled by them like anybody else that is trying to use their mind to figure out for their own satisfaction what we may or may not be getting told the truth about, which is very little. So you're left with just trying to decipher a lot of things that, I wasn't there. It's like I wasn't at the Twin Towers when they fell. I couldn't really tell you because I don't have firsthand knowledge. I'm resting upon what everyone else is saying, and that everyone else is saying is coming from the mainstream media.
Right.
And anything that's being said about it that might be counter to the official narrative is immediately pushed aside and buried and called a conspiracy theory. They're wingnuts. They have nefarious intentions. They're trying to, it's a desiccation to the 3,700 people who died and all that sort of thing. Then it becomes this big scourge, and it's not. It's information that is of interest. I mean, again, really don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but, I was just talking to my girlfriend about this not too long ago as it related to 9/11. The little white plane that was seen by plenty of people in rural Pennsylvania just prior to and after the downing of, I don't remember the flight numbers and that whole thing, but the Shanksville plane that went down before supposedly it was headed for the White House to crash into the White House. What's up with that? That was a real thing that was seen by plenty of people, and you don't hear about that at all, and it's because you're not supposed to hear about it. But does that mean that it didn't happen? Nobody had ever seen anything like that before, and yet we got a good, dozen people at least, and to me that's plenty, that are out doing what they do every single day. These are, again, what you look for when it comes to people that give you sightings and things that are, you know, if we're not talking about trained military personnel or pilots, of course, those are the best, because not only, you know, have they broken their oath of clearance and all these things, they're traitorous, you know, so they're somehow more trustable to the public, but, you know, they also know about what flying things look like. I mean, so just without saying anything more, there's things on it on Google. It's been really suppressed, so good luck digging for it, but it's out there. Just the little white plane around Shanksville, the vicinity, that alone, you don't hear anything about that at all. And is it just made up by somebody after the fact to get a little attention? Why? Why would farmers that are out there doing their thing just want to say something like that? It doesn't make any sense. And so I will tell you this, just based on looking back at two things that have happened in the last 25 years to this country, which are quite extraordinary. You know, we had the incidents of 9/11, which we're coming up on too. And then we have the pandemic. I think personally that it should be noted that the Patriot Act is large. It's very large. We're talking more than Tolstoy here. Like, this is a thick act. This is a lot of paperwork. And it was drafted in a very short amount of time after this occurred.
Right.
In fact, it has been suggested by anybody that knows anything about writing acts. We're not talking about a bill. Bills can be written overnight. This is an act, and it's huge. It's immense, and its reach is vast. When it covers every corner of the way we live, there's something in there about it. Go through it sometime. It's public record nonetheless. Read it, or parts of it. It'll take you forever to get through.
Or understand it, the whole thing.
Doesn't it seem interestingly convenient to you that this dramatic event happens on a massive world stage, and within days we have the Patriot Act? So in my opinion, this lends credence to the fact that this is in some way, if it's not a staged event, it's at least known by some parties that it's going to happen, and they allowed it to happen. I don't know which, again, but just to me, based on that alone, I would think that would be your conclusion as a lucid and rational person. Now, when it comes to the pandemic, to me, I think this is I don't think the pandemic was pulled off purposefully. I don't think that I think it's like any pandemic might happen. Yeah, it may have escaped from some laboratory. They're fucking around with this stuff everywhere. You know that. They're crazy bastards. And they got stuff way, way, way worse than COVID sitting around in labs in glass tubes and vials and shit. Way, way worse than that. So we probably got off lucky that, you know, Captain Trips didn't come visiting this time around, but it's always knocking. But I personally don't believe that the pandemic was a staged incident. It may have been, for all I know. What do I know about it? You know, I lived through it just as a lay citizen dumbass. I'm not part of this secret circle or inner society that may have done this shit. But boy, what a convenient time to seize on everybody who may have been rattling a little bit of a garbage can lid online that was anti-government or anti-establishment or anti-official narrative, even a little bit, because they shut down more YouTube channels and more, at the time, Twitter handles and more people that were grazing at the cutting edge of something that was vastly removed from the official narrative. They seized upon that opportunity quick because they saw, well, now it's not safe. Now we have a legitimate excuse to keep everybody safe, so we have to shut you down because you're spreading things that aren't true. Well, think about if the internet had existed. This is always the analogy that I use. Think about if the internet had existed when King George was around, and King George was in control of the internet when your big US of A that you're so proud of all got going with these forefathers running around over here trying to carve out a piece of the dream for themselves in the new world. Now, as soon as King George hears about this shit, what do you think he's going to do with all of their Twitter handles?
Cancel your ass.
And all their YouTube channels. You bet your ass he is. They're fucking gone.
Yeah.
So it doesn't take a lot of rational thought to chisel through the facade. The facade is weak, and it's been weak for a long time.
Yeah.
But And I know it's difficult to live the lie and yet fight against it at the same time. But that's the plight that most of us are in, because we're westernized and we're not giving up our toys, and we're not giving up our heat and our light and our
conveniences.
Okay, I think for now that's fine, but you can still, you can propagate a truth, or at least something that isn't what you know is not valid. It's a lie. I can't tell you, like I said, look, I wasn't in the secret meetings if they happened before any of this stuff. I wasn't there cleaning up anything at ground zero. I don't have firsthand knowledge of epidemiology or any of that. So I have none of that to fall back on. But just as somebody who, like you, who like everybody else, lived through this, I do have a conscious mind, as we'd call it. And so therefore I have the ability to say, what is it that makes sense here based on history and what doesn't?
Yeah.
And to me, that's a glaring weakness in this. So again, circling now all the way back to the crop circle thing, why is this a danger? Why is this
Why is it polarizing?
Why do they not? Yeah, why were we not allowed to know the truth about the crop circle phenomenon? And after it got to be too much of a nag and too many people got interested in it, they just said, we're going to drop, like I said, the bomb out there. Laurel and Hardy were out making them in a field, and they do it all the time. And it was one big, stupid, them trying to fool the world. It's ridiculous.
Well, and I think it's safe to say, just like the 9/11, and I think that, it is very, any kind of theory aside, it's fascinating to me how quickly we will give up our rights in the perceived sense of safety. It is always very scary how quickly society will give up their rights and make sweeping changes to acts or laws or whatever based on safety. And that always seems to be the underlining common denominator in a lot of those events throughout our history, where it's all in the sense of safety. And going to the crop circles, again, doesn't seem like it's something that is really a detriment to anyone's health. So I think that we could say what we've said in the past on some of these situations, which is they probably don't know, and they don't want to say they don't know.
Well, it could be that, or it could just be that, messages from Mother Earth herself about her peril are bad for business. And let's face it, they are bad for business. I mean,
it's inconvenient.
If those, it's the old inconvenient truth. And look, sadly, it gets into the political waters because Al Gore was a politician. He's vice president for 8 years. But
he did invent the internet, Jack.
Well, of course he did, right. But if you've ever seen an inconvenient truth, it's well done, and you can't deny a damn thing that's in it. So, look, I'm no Democrat, I'm no Republican. I don't get into that shit. I'm not a joiner, as we've talked about. As Wayne Dyer used to say, the only thing I really know that he ever said that I really liked, I don't join parties and get into that whole thing. It's a distraction. It's a rive. It's divisive. There's no reason for it.
I think we need to form a new party. I think we need to call ourselves Existence.
The Existence Party?
Yeah, we're an Existence Party.
The only thing is that I would think the Existence Party is so inclusive that it would sadly also envelop and encircle some of the most radical right and left-wing people that we have in the world that belong to all kinds of political movements, because they exist too. And see, that's the point, is that why all the fighting? Why all the bickering? I mean, we do differ on certain things, but what is it that it typically comes down to that we bicker over? Yes, we do have some seemingly moral questions that we have. The thing about when is a baby, and not a fetus anymore. And if it's a fetus, does it have rights? These are all spectacular questions, but they are few and far between, because typically what we argue about is what will put money and power into someone's possession. That's all we argue about. And that's what creates, oh, great, now we're going to get pulled.
I know, right? Maybe we should edit that out. We'll edit that out.
think the government was just doing that. It wasn't even you that was putting that in.
It all comes down to the coin, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's the thing that's sad about, again, now going all the way back to our original topic of Sasquatch. If they, if they find a Sasquatch, I mean, are we going to know about it? I mean, for all we know, they have them floating in tanks somewhere right now underneath Dover, Delaware, in some secret laboratory. So who knows? And I'm almost starting to think that it's this crossover of this AI where we literally have to question what reality is, because that's what it's forcing us to do. But maybe that's our key. Maybe that's exactly whatever it is that's been visiting us, and all these mysteries that surround us have been waiting for a few thousand years. Is okay, as soon as they get to the point where they can be kind of seemingly the make and master of their own reality, where they can dupe themselves into what's really real and what's not based on technology, or maybe there's some kind of wizardry aside that we could have gone a different road and done the same thing. By whatever means, if we get these creatures, these human things, to the point where they can't really separate their own reality from another one, and we've blurred those lines enough, then those things that truly are real in some fashion can come in and they can coexist with us because of that. Whereas before, the lines are too hardened. I'm trying to look on the positive side here, maybe just theoretically. So.
I like it. Excuse me, Mr. Sasquatch, whose shirt do you wear? I'd like to meet his tailor.
Where do you shop?
Did you see what I just did there? I mashed up two songs.
Yes. You did. Nicely done. That was swift. Very swift of you.
All right, Jack. Well, before they kick us out of this joint or censor us or cancel us or whatever they're going to do, let's get on out of here.
Sounds good. I'm ready for incineration from above with their secret laser beam.
Laser. All right, you have yourself a good evening.
You too, my friend. Don't forget your turkey cranberry latte here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I got to drink it all.
Nothing like Thanksgiving leftovers in a latte.
Well, it looks like Jack and Michael have finished up their latest chat about all things existence. But if anything they said got your own Existence Brewing, be sure and catch their other talks at existencebrewing.com and drop them an email to share your thoughts using contact@existencebrewing.com.
Existence Brewing.